Today, we become legends.
So this guide has been a long time in the making, but it's finally ready. After the amazing reception to my solo lane guide for Season 7, I decided to go all in on making the guides for this year the best ones ever. These videos take dozens of hours to make, from research to scripting to editing, so if you enjoy and or learn something from this, then be sure to subscribe to the channel for the mid, ADC and support guides that will follow this one and all the other guides I do here on the channel. But without further ado, let's jump straight in with the comprehensive jungle guide for Season 7. So as with all my role guides, there's a lot to cover for the jungle, so I like to split things up into smaller subsections to make it a little easier to take in. If you feel you know some of the more basic stuff, you can skip around to the sections you need using the timestamps on screen or in the pinned comment down below. So first up, what is a jungler? This section will cover the basics of what a jungler in Smite is and what their role is in the team. Section 2 will cover the jungle layout, key locations of buff camps, etc. Section 3 will be a quick explanation of which gods are viable in the jungle. These first three sections, if you already know the basics of conquest and jungling, you can probably skip them. Section 4 is builds, which items you need and what's good for your typical junglers, followed by build examples for every viable jungler. Following that, I'll have a larger section on farming as a jungler, how to efficiently move around the map, farming routes and pathing, all that stuff. Section 6 will be the second pillar of the jungle role, ganking. The first being farming, of course. This section will cover how to gank, how to recognise a good gank opportunity and capitalise on it, as well as how to avoid bad ganks and balance ganking with farming. And finally, the last section here will be on teamfighting as a typical jungle god in the late game, as well as some information on objective play and sieging. So jungling in Smite is by nature very different to any other role. Most laning roles in Smite get minions as a safe, reliable source of farm every 30 seconds, junglers don't get that. The jungler's two main jobs in Smite is to farm the jungle camps between the lanes for XP and gold, and to gank the lanes where needed to get your team ahead and ultimately win the game. I wouldn't recommend trying to learn jungle as your first role in Conquest, but if you're up for a challenge and something profoundly different to shake things up, I highly recommend giving jungle a try. It can be one of the most fun and rewarding roles in Smite with a huge skill ceiling and room for improvement in every aspect of jungling. The jungle in Smite exists in two sections between the three lanes. Each of these two sections has different camps and objectives in it. You have the duo side and the solo side jungle, and within these two sides you also have your half and the enemy's half, essentially dividing the jungle into 4 even sections. Your halves of the jungle are identical to the enemy's halves of the jungle mirrored in the x-axis, so if a buff is in one place in your half of the jungle, it's in the exact same place in the enemy's half of the jungle. So you really only need to learn the locations of your own camps plus some neutral ones, and you've learnt the entire jungle. There are 3 fundamental camp types in the jungle. The first and most important type is buff camps. These are camps that provide a hefty amount of gold and XP, but also drop a buff on death that your team can pick up. These buff camps are speed buff, blue buff, red buff and purple buff. Speed buff is located at the back of your solo side jungle and gives the wielder a buff to movement speed. This buff is for you as the jungler to get around the map faster and more efficiently. The blue buff is a short walk from speed near solo lane. This buff gives mana regen and cooldown reduction to the wielder and goes to the solo laner. Crossing over to the duo side jungle, we have the red buff located just off the side of mid lane. This gives extra power and damage and is given to the mid laner. And finally, over by duo lane we have the purple buff, which gives attack speed and a protection reduction aura to the wielder. This goes to the ADC in duo lane. And as I said earlier, the enemy also has these 4 buffs on their side of the map in the same locations. The second camp type in the jungle are harpy camps. These make up the bulk of the rest of the jungle that's not buff camps. These simply give gold and XP for killing them and are a way to give junglers farm outside of just killing buff camps. They give no extra benefit, but are still key to maintaining your farm and keeping even with the laners and the rest of the game. You have 2 back camps, one on duo side and one on solo side, and 1 alpha harpy just off the side of the duo lane. These camps once again are in the same locations on the enemy side of the map. And there's also the small and large mid camps. Each team has 1 set of small mid camps on the duo side of mid lane, but there's also a single set of larger mid camps that give more gold on the solo side. These are highly contested as they're in a neutral location and there's only 1 camp, meaning both teams have to fight over it. And finally, in a similar vein, there's the Oracle Harpies. These are located in duo side jungle in a neutral location similar to the large mid camps. These are harder to kill but give a bit more XP and gold while also providing an uncounterable area of vision around the Gold Fury. The final camp type in jungle are what I call miscellaneous camps. Currently there's just 2 of these. The first is the Totem of Ku, located next to solo lane. This gives mana regen, movement speed and gold to the entire team when you take it. This isn't really a priority for you as the jungler, it's mostly taken by the solo laner, so you don't really need to worry about this too much. The other miscellaneous camp is the gold chalices, which you do need to concern yourself with. These chalices fill with 5 gold every time you take a camp, up to a maximum of 35 gold after 7 camps. Hitting it will give that gold to every member of your team, so it's important to hit this on the way past when going to your back camps or speed buff when it's reasonably full to give that extra gold to both you and your team. So that's all the relevant camps of the jungle and its layout. If you want to know a little more about this stuff and about the objectives in Conquest, you can check out my basic Conquest guide for more detail on this kind of stuff. So which gods are successful in the jungle? Well, assassins are the primary class that sees play in jungle, and 80 to 90% of your matchups will be assassins, so it's worth learning them primarily and only learning other picks once you're comfortable in the jungle. I strongly recommend getting a good baseline with at least 5 assassins to learn the role before branching out into other classes. Assassins have good damage and mobility, which makes them perfect for jungling, so any assassin in the game can make a good jungler. You can't really go wrong with assassins. The second most represented class in jungle is warriors, who often build more damage focused and act like a slightly tankier assassin when played in jungle. The most common warriors for jungle are Achilles, Kukulkan, Erlangshen, Mulan, Nike, Odin, and Vamana. Others can work, but these are the ones that see the most reliable play in jungle as of this video. A few mages see some play in the jungle, the most common ones being Aokwang, Hebo, Poseidon, and the Morrigan. And finally, some Guardians can work too as more tanky frontline junglers such as Ares, Athena, Kabrakan and Ymir. Once again, some other picks can work sometimes, but these are the most viable Guardians as of the recording of this video. As for Hunters, none see reliable enough play in the jungle to be considered meta relevant in my opinion. If you're trying to learn the role, I would stay away from Hunters and stick to the other 4 classes that I mentioned. Okay, so moving into builds. For this section, I'll be covering builds for assassins and warriors mainly. This is simply due to time constraints. I can't cover a build for every god in the game, and covering separate builds for all the viable mages or guardians would take too long. However, I will have some full build examples for all the gods that I think are viable at the end of this section if you just need a quick build that can get you started. So for starting builds in jungle, you of course need Assassin's Blessing, no matter what god you're playing. This gives you extra damage against jungle camps and healing from killing them, among other benefits. This is essential for any jungler. After Blessing, you have 800 gold left to work with. This will be spent on a tier 1 item plus Hand of the Gods and potions. The tier 1 item you get here you'll finish as your second item after boots, so it depends on which god you're playing. If you need a specific build, then you can check out the full builds at the end of this section. But in general, this tier 1 item will be either Mace if you're rushing Crusher, Brawler's Beatstick or Jotun's Wrath, Morningstar if you're rushing Transcendence or Hydra's Lament, or in very rare cases you might want to get tier 1 boots or tier 1 katana in this slot. On most standard ability based assassins you'll be wanting Mace here usually though, that's what I recommend. Then you want Hand of the Gods for 100 gold and health potions with any remaining gold you have after that. So you'll get 1 health potion with Mace start, 2 health potions with Morningstar start. So that's your starting builds: Assassin's Blessing, tier 1 item, Hand of the Gods and any remaining gold on health potions. Let's move on to your boots. On most assassins in the game, you basically have 2 boots choices: Talaria boots and Warrior Tabi. Talaria boots gives more movement speed and some MP5 to sustain in the jungle, while Warrior Tabi offers more damage. The more popular of these 2 options right now is Talaria, but that could change as they get nerfed or the meta changes. Warrior Tabi is definitely still a viable option in my opinion if you prefer more damage over the movement speed and MP5. It's also worth noting that a very few niche gods use Ninja Tabi in the jungle, but that's not really that common. So after boots, you need to finish that tier 1 item you started into a full item. So Crusher, Brawlers or Jotun's Wrath if you started Mace, and Transcendence or Hydra's Lament if you started Morningstar. Though once again, I recommend starting Mace on any ability based assassin right now, it's usually the better choice. So after your first 2 items, you can start adapting your build to the situation or items you like. Here's a list of items that I pick from when rounding out the rest of my jungle build for ability based assassins. The 5 items I talked about before can all be built later on in the build if they weren't your first item, so Jotun's Wrath, the Crusher, Brawler's Beatstick against healers, Transcendence, and Hydra's Lament. Beyond those items, Arendite is a nice mid-game item for a lot of assassins. They tend to ult aggressively into fights and on ganks, so they utilise Arendite's passive really well, plus it has 70 power and 10% cooldown reduction, which are really good stats for the cost. Titan's Bane is a good late game item if you need to deal with tanks. Assassins will often focus squishies like the enemy mage or hunter, but if you do find yourself fighting tanks and not doing much damage to them, the percent pen on Titan's Bane will up your damage a lot versus the tanks. Heartseeker is basically a must on any ability based assassin in the current meta. This might change, but getting Heartseeker is always a good choice on most junglers. It's very expensive and you want to get it late into your build so you don't mess up your power curves, but it's insanely good for a single slot in your build in like a 5th or 6th slot. Bloodforge is another late game luxury item that you want mostly if you're getting reliable kills when diving. The passive health shield this item gives on getting a kill can turn a single pick into a teamfight win using its passive. Though it's not an item you want every game and it's also a late game pickup, not something you build early on. In terms of defensive options for junglers, Void Shield is a good hybrid option that still gives decent damage but also some physical defense and HP to survive longer in those backline dives. Relic Dagger is a nice utility item, offering some health, CDR and movement speed while also taking 40 seconds off your relics. This is especially good on gods that rely on blink a lot for engaging to reduce the cooldown and allow them to engage more frequently. Magi's Cloak can be good if you're getting focused down by hard CCs and need some immunity while also getting a little bit of tankiness. And Mantle of Discord is a pretty nice catch-all defense item, giving 60 of each prots, 10% cooldown and a passive that can save you from being CC chained to death when you dive. If you're having trouble getting bursted or CC'd, Mantle of Discord can be a good option. Keep in mind these items are for ability-based junglers only. If you're playing an auto-attack assassin or warrior or another class entirely in the jungle, then you won't be building these items. But ability-based assassins are by far the most common picks in jungle, so I'm covering their build options in depth. As for relics on junglers, unless you're playing some weird pick like a Guardian, your 3 relic choices are Beads, Blink and Aegis. For the most part, you go Beads and Blink in your average game. The mobility and engage potential from Blink is usually more valuable on assassins than getting Aegis, but into certain matchups you might want Aegis. Beads is a 100% must on assassins to stop you getting CC'd once and dying instantly. Usually you go Blink first and Beads second, but if you need CC immunity in the early levels, such as against a Fenrir or an Ares for example, you can get Beads first and Blink second. If you need builds for auto-attack junglers like Mercury or Kali, then I've got some full build examples for all junglers coming up now to end off this section. So here's a full build for Arachne, Awilix, Bakasura, Bastet, Kamazots, Daji, Fenrir, Hunbats, Kali, Loki, Mercury, Neja, Nemesis, Pele, Ratatoska, Raven, Serket, Set, Susano, Thanatos, Thor, Achilles, Erlangshen, Mulan, Nike, Odin, Vamana, Alquang, and finally Hebo. These builds are for the most popular junglers as of recording this video, and are also generic builds that will work decently as a baseline, but I highly recommend adjusting them to your own liking and the current match. Adapting your builds to fit to the situation is critical to becoming good at any role, and that applies to jungle as well. But these builds should be good enough to get you rolling and learning the jungle. Okay, so with builds done, let's move on to the first of 2 very important sections for this guide that make up the meat of actually jungling. Farming, pathing, and efficient play within the jungle. The section after this one will cover the other half of jungling, which is ganking and rotations. Farming is critically important and is an aspect of jungle that I see a lot of new players fail with. They focus too much on ganking or just move around the jungle very inefficiently, not tracking their camp timers and wasting time that they could be spent getting a lead over the enemy jungler. So to start the game as a jungler, you'll clear speed buff with your mid laner, then move on to back camps then blue buff, or blue buff then back camps if your solo laner wants to start at blue. Unfortunately, I'm making this guide right as the meta is kind of being defined in terms of where the solo laner starts, blue or lane, so I can't say definitively where you need to be, but if you see your solo laner standing at the blue buff and not in lane, you need to be at blue second. Otherwise, back camp second and then blue third. From there, you roam to mid lane where you can contest mid camps, get red buff, fight in the 2v2, help your mid laner clear waves, or even invade. At this point, the game cracks wide open based on what you do and what the enemy does, so beyond this point, there's no set place you need to be at a set time. You just need to be reacting to what's happening and making plays, and pick where you need to be to have the most impact while keeping your farm maintained. So more than any other role, your minimap is your best friend as a jungler. You can track your jungle camp timers to see which ones are spawning soon to figure out where to be. You can also track the enemy jungler's rotations if you have wards up and see where your teammates are. Buff camps are a priority as a jungler. They respawn every 2 minutes and the buff they drop lasts 2 minutes, so you want to be there as soon as possible after they spawn to keep those important buffs up on your teammates. This is especially true of your speed camp, which you want to prioritize since it gives that movement speed to help you farm faster and gank better. Once buff camps are dealt with, you should then look to grab neutral farm from the map. This is pretty much mid camps and oracles, since these camps are much easier for enemies to take than your own camps, so if you secure these before the enemy can, you can get a lead that way. After buffs and neutral farm, you should then go for your back harpies, which are less valuable but always worth taking if you're passing them by a buff rotation or coming out of base. Just don't go too far out of your way or backtrack on yourself to get back camps unless you really need the gold badly or have nothing else to do. Also, a quick note that generally junglers stay away from duo lanes farm, and also the Totem of Ku. This goes for purple buff and also the alpha harpy of duo lane. This farm is usually pretty out of the way for you unless you're specifically looking to gank duo, and it tends to put the duo behind if you're always taking their purple buff and harpy camp XP. So focus on other farm if you can on the map and only take these as a last resort if you need some gold. Also in terms of farming, as a jungler you can leech mid waves sometimes, especially early in the game to help them clear and get some levels early on, but try to avoid leeching more than a few waves after the early levels and farm your own camps. If you leech every other wave from mid, it's just going to put your mid laner behind. You usually have plenty of camps to farm yourself and don't really need to leech waves for XP. As for invading enemy camps, this is a pretty bad strategy early on because you get heavily slowed when trying to invade before minions spawn at the start of the game. However, invading after this point when this slow wears off is fair game, and you can sneak a farm lead on the enemy jungler by taking away his back camps or even his buffs if he's not paying attention. Invades are worth double, since you gain a camp's worth of farm while the enemy loses a camp's worth. So a successful invade is a great way to gain a lead if you're comfortable in the role. This is a risky strategy as if the enemy catches you invading, you're in a bad spot and can get punished, so I don't recommend it if you're new and just learning the role. But if you ward up or see the enemy jungler on the other side of the map to a buff camp you know is up, you can invade it to get a farm lead. Efficient farming pretty much comes down to paying attention and not leaving your camps up for long periods of time before taking them. I like to plan my routes about 30 seconds ahead of time, so I'll look for things that are spawning within that time frame and plan a route where I can effectively take all of those camps in a linear fashion without doubling back on myself or wasting time. This also goes for standing in lanes waiting for things to happen or taking longer paths than necessary to get to camps. Basically, just be doing something useful at all times, don't stand there doing nothing. You can also plan your backs this way. If you need 500 gold to finish an item, you can look at your camp timers and plan a way to take enough camps efficiently to get enough gold before backing. If you employ this method of thinking ahead of time and planning farm routes, you'll farm much more effectively than if you just try to react to camps that have just spawned and run over to them, just to look again for camps that have spawned now and run over and kill that one, and so on. Farming in this way will lead to lots of backtracking and inefficient pathing that will lead you to falling behind the enemy jungler. Another key point that can allow you to track the enemy jungler even without warding is that for most of the early game, your camp timers will reflect the enemy's camp timers. These won't be exact, but within plus or minus 5 seconds or so. If your speed is spawning soon, likelihood is the enemy speed is also spawning soon, and that's where the enemy jungler is going to be. If your back camps are about to spawn, so are theirs, so maybe you can invade them if you see the enemy jungler on red buff for example. This isn't exact, and once the game moves out of the first few buff rotations, this won't be as useful, but you can adjust to these timings and get information on the enemy side of the jungle without even warding or going into their side of the map. Okay, so now you can farm effectively, let's cover the second pillar of the jungle role, that being ganks and rotations. Farming is great and all, but if you just farm and don't make an impact on the game, you're going to be useless. Ganking is how a jungler makes an impact on the game, and doing it effectively is once again key to being a good jungler. If you nail these two things, efficient farming and effective ganks, you'll improve massively as a jungler. Now, right off the bat, I have to be upfront and say that I can't tell you exactly when and where to gank. Unfortunately, that's very different game to game and is something that you have to get a feel for by playing in various situations in the jungle. I can, however, give you some pointers and tips that can help you make those decisions in your current match and gank more effectively. The first thing I want to say about ganks is that you don't have to gank where the enemy jungler is ganking. I see tons of new junglers get hung up on the fact that the enemy jungler ganks solo lane and immediately run over there to help. Sometimes you're not in position to respond to an enemy gank, that's fine. You might be better off ganking a different lane like mid or duo since you know the enemy jungler is busy in solo lane and you'll have a man advantage if you go for a gank in one of the other two lanes. If you're successful, you could maybe even get an objective or an invade off of it as well. Ganking is mostly about weighing the costs versus the benefits of a gank as well as the chances of the gank being successful. Some ganks are easy and clean. The enemy might be on your team's tower line on half health and it's a free kill. In this case, the low risk means it's worth doing even if you get nothing more than a kill from it. Sometimes a gank is riskier but a higher payoff like a potential Goal Fury off of the gank or a double kill in duo lane makes the gank still worth going for even if it's not a guarantee. And then some ganks are incredibly risky with no real payoff besides a kill, in which case it's probably not worth going for. Playing the jungle a lot really helps with this since you can see where your ganks succeeded or failed and what you got off of each gank and see if it was worth it and learn from that if a similar situation arises in a future match. How much you gank and balance it with farming also depends on your current god pick. Some gods will focus more on ganking and fighting early than farming, and others focus more on farming early than fighting. It's pretty much a set of scales with junglers. If you focus more on ganks, you naturally have to farm less to balance it out. Kali will farm more early on so she can get her items online and get to late game faster. Thanatos will fight and gank a lot to abuse his early damage and snowball his team to a win before he falls off late game. You can use this info to know how to play both on your own god and also how the enemy will play and what you can expect from them. Wards are also really important for ganks. Your team needs to be buying them of course, but junglers can also make use of wards too. You can ward mid if your mid isn't doing so because it's very important to have mid warded, or even if your mid is warding and you just want extra coverage you can ward there as well because mid really has 4 places you need warded. But a lot of the time I like to ward deep as the jungler so I can catch enemy rotations through key choke points or have an eye on the enemy jungler doing camps. If you deep ward near the enemy's speed and back camps, you can see them as they do those camps, and maybe that allows you to like gank duo or something since you know they won't be able to respond quickly to your rotation because they're currently on their solo side back camps. Wards give you key info like this and allow you to tell if an enemy gank is coming or if you can force a gank yourself that the enemy can't respond to. It also helps to know common ward spots so you can avoid enemy wards on rotations and ganks. If you know where the enemy will typically ward, you can prey on their feeling of safety that they get from those wards by moving around them and getting surprise ganks that they didn't see coming. And of course, sentry wards are extremely important and can eliminate enemy wards entirely and make the whole process much easier, so buy sentries. Also, it might seem obvious, but communicate with your team when trying to make a gank happen. If your ult just came up, tell them and let them know you might gank soon. And when you do gank, make sure to call it by saying you'll attack right lane or you'll gank left lane or whatever. Some teammates are genuinely oblivious or too focused on fighting to notice you're ganking, so just call it out. It'll save you a lot of hassle and allows them to prepare and save their cooldowns for when you gank to have a better chance at landing the kill. Your teammates aren't inside your head, just like you're not inside theirs, so good communication is key if you're trying to gank lanes effectively. And finally, a gank isn't necessarily a failure just because you didn't land a kill. Sometimes ganks can relieve pressure being put on your teammates and allow them to back without losing their tower, buff camp or minion wave to the enemy. You can force defensive relics like beads and Aegis from the enemies, allowing you to gank more easily next time, or have your own teammates get an advantage in the lane fight. Or you can force the enemy back to base if you get them low so they'll miss farm. So don't get too down on yourself if your gank didn't directly result in a kill, it can still have been a successful gank that was worth the time. Alright, so finally, team fighting as a jungler. For this section, I'm going to assume you're playing an assassin or a warrior that is aiming to dive the backline like a typical jungler would. Some picks like Guardian junglers don't necessarily play this way, but I can't really cover team fighting for every single jungle pick, so I'll talk about it from the frame of reference of the most common playstyle in jungle. So your main job as an assassin in late game teamfights is to dive the enemy backline and kill their mage and hunter, usually their mage. Your high mobility and burst damage allows you to quickly get in, nuke their carries, and hopefully get out safely. Jungle teamfights work best for this as it allows you to skulk around the jungle and lurk around corners waiting to blink in on an out of position enemy and take them down. Lane teamfights or sieges are less favourable for assassins because it's harder to get to the backline and the enemies will tend to be more grouped up, making it harder to dive without resistance. A key point about teamfighting as a jungler is that you don't always have to all-in someone with your entire kit when you dive. A lot of the time, the enemy will have relics or peel from their support, and getting the kill either isn't possible or will result in you dying in trade because you dumped your entire kit to get the kill and just got cleaned up afterwards. In situations like this, you can often just go in, take half their mage's health and maybe their beads, then go back in later when they have no beads left and kill them much more easily. On that note, pay attention to who is around the enemy carries before trying to dive them. Try to catch them when they're out of position or split up from their support, as this will make killing them far easier. If you see they're with their support, it might be worth waiting for your team to engage and take some attention away, or like I said earlier, just half engage and force relics or poke them out and back off. For objective play, as a jungler, you're usually playing a zoning role, keeping enemies away from the objective while your team clears it and looking to pick off easy kills as the enemies walk in to try and steal. You can also be a damage dealer for the objective in some situations, like if your solo laner is zoning already, or if you're a Mercury or Kali for example that have much higher objective damage than normal assassins. And for sieging, you'll typically want to wait for your solo or support to engage and tank the tower or phoenix before following up yourself. If you're the first one in on a phoenix siege as the jungler, you're the first one dead most of the time. Use the chaos of a solo or support initiation to do your thing and pick off key targets in the backline. Once again, as with objectives, some junglers like Mercury, Kali, Bakasura, etc. can also help with taking the Phoenix due to their high auto attack damage. But that's about it from me on the complete jungle guide for Season 7. This has been a long time in the making, so if you stayed till the end, thank you so much for watching the whole thing, it really means a lot. And if you enjoyed this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel for the other role guides coming soon. I tried to make this one as in-depth as possible, so hopefully it was worth it. Leave any other tips you guys have for aspiring junglers down below, and I'll catch you guys in another video later on. Have a great day, stay safe, and peace out you nerds.